don't have a lot of Halloween decorations. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are finally going to start on some spooky creatures because it is October and that means I have permission to make scary stuff. Anyways, I'm going to be making an 8-legged demon horse. I thought this would be a lot of fun. 8-legged horses are more of a Nordic mythical creature. In fact, I think Odin's steed is an 8-legged horse, and I think you say the horse's name as Sleipnir, but don't quote me on it because I'm not 100% sure. I'm really bad at pronouncing things. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, so I think the first thing that we're going to start on is going to be the head for our 8-legged horse, and then we're going to work on all the 8 hooves. Now this project actually took me quite a while to complete. I actually started it roughly around when I did my last unicorn. I've got that video up, so it was like roughly like 2-3 months ago maybe. So that just kind of shows you how long I was working on this piece in between other projects. And it really wasn't because there was a lot of detail and stuff involved in it. It was just a lot of sewing and I didn't want to get worn out on it. So while I'm working on this piece, you're going to notice a little bit of a similarity to the unicorn that we did, and that's because I used a similar body style and roughly kept it about the same size as well. The main difference is I didn't want it to look so childlike. I still wanted it to look like a baby horse, but I didn't want to have like the prominent snout and the really large eyes. I wanted things to be a bit more proportionate. Also, I wanted to give it a spooky quality, so I kept things a little bit more angular and stuff. Anyways, what I started with was a very large lump of tinfoil, and I started completely covering this in clay. So I just did little strips going all the way up, and then I started blending everything together. And basically what I'm trying to do right now is just get a basic shape down. I'm not going to add any details until I know I like the shape of the head. After that, I'm going to add some eyes to the piece. These are my normal resin eyes that I like making. I tried to make them a little bit more spooky, so I used a lot of reds and even like red glitter in them. So they actually look kind of cool and creepy, and I was really happy with how these turned out, so I wanted to use them for this piece. So I'm just going to take these, I'm going to push them into the sides of the face where I want the eyes to go, make sure they're nice and even, and then we're going to start building up our eyelids around them. You'll notice when I'm putting the eyes into place, I'm trying to keep them pretty flush with the rest of the face, more like a normal horse instead of like how we did the unicorn where they're a bit more bug-eyed, and I was trying to go more of a cartoon type style. For this, I want it to look cute, but I don't want it to look like a cartoon character. After I was done with the eyes, I moved on to making the nostrils. So for these, I'm going to make them a little larger than when I did the unicorn. I'm going to make them a bit more flared, and then I'm going to make a very subtle mouth underneath. After I got the shape down for the nostrils and the mouth, I moved on to adding a little bit of texture to it, and then I'm going to make some holes for where we're going to connect the ears later. The reason I'm doing holes for the ears is because we're going to have those made out of felt, and I wanted a decent place to put them so that they were a bit more secure than just gluing them right on top of the head. And then I know this has nothing to do with an 8-legged horse, but I really wanted to add a small horn, and I had this really cool red one that I made out of resin, so I'm just going to include this. It's my character anyway, so I'm just going to do what I want, and I thought it'd be really cool to add just a hint more red to the face. So I'm just going to push this into the forehead where I want. I'm going to make sure the clay is nice and secure around it so it's not going to pop off. And then we're just going to clean up the edges around the base of the head. So I'm going to put it in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 55 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. And then while that's baking, we can start working on our hooves. Now for the hooves, I left them pretty simple since we're going to be doing a lot of them. I really didn't want to make it super complicated because it's going to take a lot of clay and a lot of time. So what I did first was I rolled out a nice sheet of clay, and this is going to be for the bottom of the hooves. So I'm going to cut out some little circles for those, and then I'm going to roughly shape the texture of the bottom of the hoof. After that, I'm going to bake these at 275 Fahrenheit for probably about 15, maybe 25 minutes at most. Now, I'm going to be having our hooves hollow to save on clay, otherwise they're going to be really heavy. So I have lumps of tinfoil, and I'm going to glue our little circles to the bottoms of them. So I have my tinfoil roughly into the shape and size of what I need for the hoof, and once that glue has dried, what we're going to do is we're going to take strips of clay and start building up the sides of the hooves. So we're going to wrap this around our tinfoil and then blend it into the bottom portion of our clay that's already baked, and also blend it upwards. So I got the sides of the hooves all laid out, they're nice and smooth. I baked them for probably about another 45 minutes just to make sure everything was good. And now that all the clay has come out of the oven and it's cooled, we can start painting everything. Now for the painting, I'm going to leave basically everything really simple. I'm going to be primering the whole face black, and I'm going to do the same thing when we get to the hooves. So I'm going to go over the whole face with a black. I might have to do a few coats of it, and then after that I can add some highlights by using grays and whites. If I want to throw in some other colors, like in the corner of the eyes, adding a bit of a pink or something, I can, but I mainly want the colors to be black and red. I ended up doing most of the highlights around the nostrils because I wasn't quite sure if I was going to get that completely furred or if I was going to leave it blank. So I decided to focus a lot of detail on the nostrils and around the lips. And then the hooves, again, since there's a lot of them, I left it pretty simple. I painted them all solid black, and then I started adding a darker red at the top. That way it could fade from a dark red to a black. I mainly did this to kind of separate them a little bit from the color of the legs. Because everything on the horse is going to be black, I decided just adding a little bit of a dark red to it would kind of make the hooves a little bit more distinct. And then after I got everything completely painted, everything is nice and dry, I did resin over the details of the face, so around the snout and around the eyes, and then I also resined all the hooves. So those are curing right now, so now we're going to start on the sewing. So for the body, I ended up liking the pattern a lot when I made my unicorn, so I basically kept the same design for it. So I have a little mock-up of what my pattern looks like, and I'm going to be using this to make the pattern for the 8-legged horse. So the body is exactly the same. I didn't use the tail because we're going to use something different, and the legs I just had to make some extra ones to go in between the front and the back legs. And then the fabric that I'm using is going to be a very short plush black because I wanted to have the shape of the body really prominent, and I didn't want to have to worry about shaving it or anything like that. So these are the sides for the body. I got the left and the right, and you'll notice all the line works and stuff kind of drawn around the chest and the back region. These are going to be guides for sewing on the legs. So what I'm going to do so that these lines are on the other side and I don't have to draw on the outer side of the fabric is I'm going to follow these with a sewing machine. That way we can follow the sewing lines when we add the legs into place. So I'm going to do that, and I'm also going to be sewing these two layers together at the belly. So I'm going to go at the bottom of the neck and just go all the way down the belly. And then for all of the legs, all 8 of them, I have a front and a back for them. I'm going to pin these together and sew down just the fronts. For the shape of them, I have both of the front legs very similar. They're almost identical to each other. And then for the back ones, I have the more inside ones. They're going to be kind of just the same as the inside portion of the other leg. So we're going to get all that sewn, and then I'm going to work on the tail and the mane. Now for the tail and the mane, I decided that I wanted it to be very long, red, and flowing. So I found this really cool yarn that I had stored in all my other stuff that I've never used before. I'm finally going to end up using this yarn. I used to crochet, by the way. That's why I have a bunch of yarn that I never use anymore. Anyways, I'm going to be using this yarn to make the mane and the tail. So I ended up cutting a bunch of pieces of yarn all the same size, and then I folded them in half. So basically the very middle of the yarn I'm going to glue to a little patch where we're going to have all the main pieces connected. Now I'm just gluing them to this so that they hold still. We're going to be sewing them in place, but I need something for them to kind of lock into while we're sewing so I don't have them just going all over the place. So again, I'm laying out all my yarn nice and neatly, and we're going to be gluing some strips of felt to one side of them. This is going to be the side that's going to be inside of the body of the horse, so you won't see this. For the tail, I'm going to be using a lot less yarn than when I make the mane, so I'm just going to lay that out, get the felt glued onto one end, and then I'm going to roll this. And as I'm rolling it, I'm going to glue it into place so everything is connected to one giant mass of felt. And then for the mane, we're going to be using a lot more yarn, so I have my felt laid out and I'm going to slowly glue layers on top of this felt. And then once I have that glued into place, I'm going to fold my felt over and glue that onto the other side of the yarn. Okay, so that's all the prep work. Now we can start putting our 8-legged horse together. So I have a basic wire frame. You'll notice that there's only 4 legs to it, and that's because I decided to keep it a little bit simpler, and we're only going to have 4 of them supportive legs. The other ones are going to have wires, but they're just going to be there to be posed. So the only ones that are going to be weight-bearing legs are going to be the main horse legs. So it's going to be built very much like a normal horse, and then we're just going to add the legs. So I started by taking the fabric for the body, I cut some holes for the wires for the legs to go through, and then I slid this over the wire frame. Then I took the clay head that I made earlier and I glued it to the wire for the neck. Once that glue dried a little bit, I'm going to take the fabric for the neck and glue it around the base of the head. We're going to let that dry as well, and then we can stuff and close up the body. Now, stuffing and closing up this body is going to be a little bit slower because as you're stuffing and closing it up, we're also going to be adding the mane to it. So as I'm sewing the layers together, I'm going to have the yarn for the mane sticking out. So I'm going to have to run my needle and thread through this as I'm sewing it. And then once we get to the very end of the horse, we're going to sew in place the tail. And then after that, we can start adding all the legs. I'm going to start with the very front legs that are going to be weight-bearing legs, and I'm going to sew the fabric onto the body. So I'm going to sew the inside portion of the leg, the fabric for that, under the wire for the leg, and then I'm going to take the outside portion of the leg and sew it over that wire. And this portion is going to be kind of the shoulder blade. I'm going to do this to both of the front legs, and then I'm going to take a pair of hooves and I'm going to glue these to the ends of the wires. Once the hooves have dried into place, I'm going to take the fabric for the legs and I'm going to glue those around the base of the hoof. We're going to let that dry as well, and then we can stuff and close up the back of the leg. And then after we have that set of legs in place, I'm going to start on the next one that go right behind these. And these legs go on exactly like the other legs, they're just a little bit further back on the horse. The only thing different is, like I said, these are not going to be added to the wire frame, but they are going to have wires. So I'm going to cut some little holes into the sides of the body and run a wire through, kind of like a loop. So both of the legs are going to be on the same wire. And the back legs are going to be put on exactly the same way, they're just shaped slightly different. So the weight-bearing ones already have wires, and then the ones that are in between are not going to have wires, so we need to add those just like we did with the second pair of legs. You can probably see why this took me so long. The legs were just something that I slowly worked on in between other projects because they just took forever to get done. Anyways, once we have the body all done, all the legs are in place, we're going to start working on the face, and then we can finish everything up. So I'm going to start by adding a little bit more yarn to the mane, mainly because it's not on the clay head at all, and I felt like it was a little too low on the horse, so I needed to make it go up a little bit higher. And then for furring the face, I didn't use the same fabric that we made the body out of. I used a longer fur fabric, and the main reason I did this is because the other fabric is so short that you would end up seeing a lot of seams, and I didn't want to work with that. I wanted everything to be very flush. So I'm just going to be gluing the long fur fabric into place to cover most of the head, and then I'm going to shave it down. So because we're using a different type of fabric for this, the head is going to have a little bit of a different texture than the rest of the body, but the color is basically matching, so you won't really notice it visually. Now before I fur the rest of the face, I decided I wanted to work on the ears, so I'm going to make those real quick. For the ears, I'm going to be making these out of felt. So I have a black felt and a red felt. I figured to go along with the rest of the colors, the inside portion of the ears can be red as well. So basically what I'm doing to make the ears is I made a very simple pattern. I cut out one layer of felt and I glued it onto the top of the other. I let my glue dry and then I cut out the other felt. And then I'm going to take that ear, I'm going to bunch up the very end of it, and we're going to glue it into the holes that we have on the head. I'm going to adjust the position and make sure that I like how they look, that way they can dry into the shape that I want. And then after those are in place, we're going to continue furring the rest of the face. So I'm going to lay out my fabric glue onto the face, make sure it's nice and smooth, and I'm going to sprinkle on and kind of push in my little fur trimmings. I'm going to use my tools to adjust where the fur is, make sure that I like the position of it, and then I'm going to let that dry. Once it's dried, I'm going to brush away any excess fur that didn't stick to the glue, and then I can paint on some extra details. So for the painting of the fur, I'm just going to add a little bit of a gray highlight here and there just to make the face look a little bit more prominent, because it's just a little too black and you can't make out the details. I'm also going to add a bit of a gray highlight to the rest of the body, just here and there so you can see the shape of the body better. Okay guys, and that's how I made a 8-legged demon horse. I had so much fun with this project. I love how it came out, and I really like the contrast between the red and the black. He's actually kind of a heavy piece. I didn't think he'd come out this big, but oh well. Anyways, I'm going to have him along with a bunch of other creatures in my Etsy shop. Check the links down below if you want to buy anything. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!